The Nets fall at home before the break to the Washington Wizards, but there's still plenty of positives to take away from a 2-1 new look Nets, all coming up right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, FanDuel, DraftKings. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down New York Football Giants over on the One Giant podcast. And this is, unfortunately, Doug, a sour note to go into the All-Star break for the Brooklyn Nets. They fall at home to the Washington Wizards. Obviously not ideal, although we're going to end up, I think, getting into a lot of positive takeaways from what is this reconstructed roster that's only going to add more weapons after the break as well.
Yeah, like it kind of, I don't want to say should have seen this coming because it's looked pretty good over the last couple of days. The epic comeback against the Knicks is going to make you feel probably like so positive about the team that it's going to be hard to see, some of the faults or whatever. I totally get that because I went into this game thinking the same thing. Like, this team will never lose again. This Seth Curry plus Andre Drummond plus Patty Mills plus Cam Thomas simply can't lose. And, it's a nice reminder that this is still a team of role players that's played completely above their pay grade. And they deserve nothing but superlatives for it. But, we get this sort of like come down to earth moment with the Wizards where it's like, I don't even think they played that poorly in this game. It was just that we just kind of saw what happens when this is the group of guys that's out there for the team. So, that's if there's any takeaways from this one, it's that like this group of role players is excellent. And if this was your whole team for the whole season, this is going to be, a sub 500 team, but they're mostly just treading water as it is.
Yeah, and I think, we talked about it too. You win the first two games after introducing the new players, obviously lost over the weekend to the Heat, but you felt like grab this one last win. We talked about staying in the meaty part of the NBA curve when it comes to the Eastern Conference. Right now, 8-point lead as we're recording, 90-82, Philly over the Bucks. So all these things I think are why after an 11-game losing streak, you'd like to still keep checking these boxes. But to your point, you can't elevate who these players are and what the expectations should be for them. This ends up being two teams playing each other of relatively even match skills, even though it's all of the starters for the Wizards at this point, obviously without Bradley Beal with injury. That's why I think I still want to end up feeling positive around what you see from this game, because you said it. Was there really a ton out of this game that you were disappointed by, guys that didn't play their roles or serious issues that you saw within it? No, it was some pretty good shooting, a couple of bad runs by Washington to put the Nets in a hole at the half, and then also as you worked your way through the fourth quarter. But other than that, it's again, David Duke Jr. is out there playing minutes again, right? Javon Carter, who had a good game, is out there playing a lot of minutes. These are guys that but a few days ago were in Long Island or buried on the bench.
Yeah, and so and look, I don't want to look at this Wizards team of Kyle Kuzma, Corey Kispert, Raul Neto, and be like, oh, this is like their team is frankly a lot of role players too. Like this is still a very winnable game. Like there's no moral victory here. Believe me, I know we said that we've said that at times in the past. This is not one of them. They could have won this game. It's mostly a few other things go, their way. Washington doesn't shoot 50% from three, which they did over the game. A lot of them very good looks. So it's like, it's not like you can, look at this. They weren't hitting tons of contested threes. A lot of these were just kind of wide open because of bad rotations. It's mostly that you just get this sense around the Nets that we're still biding time. This is a team biding time into the All-Star break. This is a team biding time into, when they can get Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, and hopefully at some point a full-time Kyrie Irving back into the fold. And then you have to look at this and say, okay, is this team treading water good enough to make you feel good about the return of those eventual superstars? Yes, for sure. Would you like to take a W on this one? because again, this is a team that is kind of all the way in the tank right now in the Wizards, who traded away Dinwiddie, who has Beal on the shelf, who has Kristaps Porzingis coming in, but he's not playing yet. Like, yeah, you would still like to go in 3-0
Yeah.
into this game, and there's clearly reasons why that didn't happen. It's mostly that I think we're just kind of we're sitting on both sides of the fence here as Nets fans and being like, okay, yes, this is not the final grouping that we're going to see, so you can't like take any real like basketball takeaways from this game. You're not like, oh, are the actions they're running against this group going to be good enough in the playoffs? Well, who cares? Because this is not going to be the group that's going to do it. But at the same time, because they dug themselves such a hole with this 11-game losing streak, like these games are pretty important for them to win. So you still want to see the fight from the team that comes out and says, hey, we should still be winning these games, even with 60% of the active roster and like 40% of the talent. Because if you start the fact, because like Kevin Durant and Kyrie and these guys are way more talented than in the aggregate than the other guys. So I think that's kind of where we sit with this team right now, which makes these games tough to evaluate, because mostly what you want to do is it's funny. You're rooting. These are the games you root for more for as a fan, because in your basketball heart of hearts that this team is just not the team, right? Like this is the fan fun team. Like this is the team you want to root for as a fan, because you're like, we can, grit and grind our way to a victory with these, with the role players, and it just didn't happen. And that's kind of what makes it disappointing. But from a high level, it's not disappointing, but from a low level on the game perspective, you're like, oh, this one's felt like one that maybe we should have also won.
And it's 117-103 ends up being the final score. Usually we often have said, the game wasn't as close as it looks. It was a lot closer than the way this one ultimately finished, because just to round this out, after we're going to get into some player specifics here going forward in this one and what we can think about after the All-Star break. But it's at the 4:19 mark. It's 101-94, and that's after they had made a bucket coming off of an LMA shot clock beater and one got fouled on it. But they kept battling back. But the funny thing, to your point, is they got to 106-100 at a point. So that to me really was what this was. It's about a 2-possession game down the stretch. They closed from the 10-point gap, but every time that you saw a big shot from Cam, we saw a big shot from Patty. Some of these guards, LMA was big down the stretch as well. They didn't seem to have the ability to get the defensive stops on the other end, and it's always hard. We talk about this a lot with this team, even when healthy. When Kevin Durant was out on the floor, they had these issues. In this particular game, you go heavy in smaller lineups because of the offensive firepower it gives you, but they very much got sucked in on these dropping into congest the lane and trying to expand back out to pick up the perimeter shooters. And I thought for stretches, they were actually able to sort of effectively do that, where Patty Mills was sinking into the lane and then bursting back out to contest a three-pointer. But you saw kind of the legs get out from them a little bit too down the stretch of this one, where ultimately the switches, we saw this in the game prior too. They came back against the Knicks, but in the first half, the switches, the screens at the top of the arc, those were all things getting under or over the top of them. Step late, dollar short, Cam Thomas sinking into the lane way too often, getting away from his man. A lot of very open, gettable looks here for the Wizards. And you say 50% from the field, it does spell a bit of a disaster. And I don't think it's an effort or a scheme necessarily issue for the Nets. It's just a product of not having the right guys available for you in this game.
I mean, a little bit of is like not effort, but just kind of like general wherewithal of what's happening. Like you said, Cam missed his assignments a couple times. LMA or Aldridge had like at least 2 totally blown assignments.
Yeah.
Where he got back cut on one, and then like came out and did like and helped a little bit, and then it led to a cross cut pass for a 3. And like these are just things that are going to happen. Again, this is not like crazy great defensive personnel. No one's going to fool you into thinking it. I do think some of it is probably a little solvable, because like they shot the Wizards shot 50% from 3, but almost all of them were totally clean looks. Like none of this was that difficult for them, I don't think, in terms of where they were shooting from. So that's what I mean about like, but again, to go crazy about it would be folly, because this is not the final product. I think the effort was clearly there. I don't think any of this was effort, by the way. Like, and we saw the effort is what got them over the hump against the Knicks in a really amazing comeback game, because they just put in full effort. I think the effort was mostly there in this one too. It just like little things didn't go their way, and the defensive assignments definitely slipped away from them at times. Okay, we're going to talk about some more problematic stuff that I think maybe some bigger takeaway things that we can take, some problematic, some, not so much. In a second, first, got to talk to you about our friends over at Bet Online. Basketball in full steam right now, pro and college hoops. We're heading into the All-Star break. Get over to the college, though. Those guys are gearing up for the March Madness. All the latest odds, totals, player performance, props. It's all, or even the next coach to be fired. It's all there on betonline.net, the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Not just basketball either. BetOnline.net has hockey, boxing, UFC fight nights, maybe still Olympic coverage. Well, that's still rolling along. Head to the website, betonline.net today. Over on your mobile device or the computer, you can learn more about all the trends and action they have over there. Bet online, where the game starts.
And of course, you make us, the Locked On Nets podcast, your first listen. Make Locked On Now your second listen. It's breaking down all the nightly action around the league with all the local experts, free on all those great platforms. And then listen, you want to get a breath in a quick turn as to what's going on? Check it out. It's a great listen. I think really you mentioned saying problematic, and there are some things, but let's try to stay positive here for a beat on this game. And ultimately something that I think is worth discussing coming out of the All-Star break as well. We know eventually it will be Ben Simmons out there. Eventually, it will be Kevin Durant back on the floor, and then obviously Kyrie, at least for road games. When you look inside the stat line on this, I thought the sample size was nice from the standpoint of Patty Mills, Curry. You can throw Cam Thomas into this one as well. Obviously, not nearly as spectacular a performance as he had against the Knicks last night, but you also did like the fact that he hit some big shots down the stretch to kind of try to get the Nets back into this one. 20 points for him again, 7 of 17 from the field. But Mills goes for 22, 5 of 7 from deep, 3 of 6 for Seth Curry, 12 points in this one, 4-11 from the field. Even put Bruce Brown into that mix of, I know, put him more as a forward than a guard at this point, but Javon Carter as well, right? He comes off the bench, 3 of 9 from deep, 5 of 11 from the field overall. The thing that I think I like about what you're seeing in these games leading up to the break and what we can hopefully anticipate coming out of it as the Nets get healthy and out on the floor together is this feels a little bit closer to what the Nets were hoping for coming into the season, regardless of now having a new player and one player out. Javon Carter is the best defensive guard you have on the roster. He's been absolutely atrocious from the field, even managed to airball one in this one where he looks pretty good overall. But I do think that he's this 3-and-D guard that you want to have. Okay, if he can start to get a little bit more productive there, you put Seth Curry in the mix as the replacement for what Joe Harris was supposed to be in some form or fashion. This does feel like a collection of perimeter shooting guards that now when you get Kevin Durant back out there and then Ben Simmons as well, you can play off of them and really spread the floor offensively and wreak a lot of havoc on opposing defenses. It's hard to fully fall in love with it in this moment because they are the rotational players elevated in their roles. But I'm trying to envision, put Kevin Durant into this game. How much different do things look, right? How much more effective is every single thing that they do, let alone all of his game unto itself, right? So that's in the positive takeaway going to the break here is you've got a collection of shooters now. And I'm not going to put a lot of stock into Javon Carter. He can go back in the tank at any moment. But you see how different this looks when you have a collection of guys that can all chip in. Patty Mills started off slow. Seth hit a couple shots. Second half of this game, Mills started to cook it up a little bit, right? So these guys can kind of pass the baton in terms of who picks up the scoring in support of the stars.
Yeah, like this, what you need to see from the guards is they can hit open shots, and I think we actually have seen enough of that to feel pretty good about it. And I know you're digging on Javon Carter here. The month of February, 41% from three on more than 3.5 attempts per game. Now it's a little lumpy because he had the 7 for 13 3-point shooting performance in there against the Celtics, so that we called the ultimate troll game. Like that does make up a lot of this, but because 3-point shooting doesn't normalize as quickly as some of these other stats because it's just a higher variance stat. Like we are at a point now with Javon Carter where like the regular season numbers are trending into the realm of totally acceptable. I know we have like this bitter taste in our mouth from early in the season when it looked like a total train wreck of the epic proportions, but he's been good enough over the last month that you can start talking yourself into real rotational minutes for him. And there's going to be matchups where that's going to be a little bit important because I know what you're saying. You're labeling Ben Simmons as a guard, but that's like in sort of like dribbling ability only. And I'm not blaming on you. Like he's listed as a guard, like everywhere he.
Oh no, and I wasn't putting him into that group.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, I'm putting Bruce Brown into the guard group by his stature. But Simmons has to be looked at as being something up in the 3 to 5 range when you talk about.
Yeah, he's like an on-ball wing. Like I'd say we're like in such weird places with like with labeling of positions. Yeah, but I think I call them, where we both at this point call it archetypes. Like which guys fall into the similar archetypes of each other. Like Javon Carter's more in the he's like closer to Seth Curry and Patty Mills than he is to Ben Simmons, right?
Yes.
When we talk about guys that are labeled as guards. Now he's different than those guys. He's better defender than them, worse shooter. We get all the things. But I think I get, I totally agree with what you're saying, is that when we look at the takeaways from this short term is what can we get? Because what fits really well around guys like Kevin Durant, to some degree Kyrie, and then ultimately Ben Simmons when he's on the team, is that you need guys that can drill shots from beyond the arc that you can rely on to defend and just hold up their weight defensively for the most part. And if you're a little bit worse a defender, but a little better shooter, that all works like that. Like we can level that. It's like, okay, Patty Mills and Seth Curry are a little better shooters, worse defenders. Javon Carter, a little worse shooter, but better defender. Like, once we start toggling all these dials, you can start seeing a world where these guys are going to play. And I think it probably, I hope that we can look back at this stretch of the season and say it was good to get some of these guys extended runs now, because we can sort of see what the final product is going to be in a way that you don't get to see if the guys are healthy the whole time.
Yeah.
And if you're just trying to like look for a positive about these guys not being able to play, I think that's one of it. And I think, yeah, you're totally right. We've seen enough from all these guards to feel very good about the depth of that position, even without Joe Harris, who I get isn't a guard, but they're trying to make up for some of that scoring.
Again, archetypes, right? And again, on Carter specifically, as you hit the break here, Patty Mills, he was running a little bit cold from beyond the arc, right? We talked so much about him being one of the older veteran players. He plays like he's 19, but we know that he's in his 30s. You don't want to get him worn down. Now you add Curry to it, that helps you. But if Javon Carter, he doesn't need to be knocking down, 45% from beyond the arc with consistency, because he does have the defensive piece. He just needs to be consistent in what he provides for you, right? He can't give you the 0 of 6 when he gets a minute share and then come back and give you the 7 of 13 in one game. No, just give me 2 of 5, give me 3 of 6, 3 of 7, on a given night, and give me 15 minutes that I can rely on. And that's how, over these last 20 plus games of the season, you can get Patty Mills the rest that he needs and deserves, so you can really ramp him up when it comes to the playoffs. So that, as much as anything, is important. And you can throw over the short term here, obviously Bruce Brown, however you want to think about him, but a guy like DDJ, who got out there in this game, I wonder if they'll try to just give him some run exclusively for the purpose to get other guys rest that need it right now. So up until the point when Ben Simmons steps on the court, I think you're going to take every advantage you can to buy rest for some of these other players out there. And that probably extends. This was a good game for some other guys. Kessler Edwards still seems to be a little bit lost out there, but are there, we mentioned this last episode, and I'm going to lean back into it. I think Bruce Brown is rediscovering himself. And I don't know if we mentioned this or not, even though Drummond, we'll get to him in a minute, and his game, Drummond and Bruce Brown overlapped in Detroit in their time there. So I think that there's also this additional benefit of bringing in guys that someone has familiarity with and is able to get him maybe back to a sense of a role and identity in what he needs to be functioning as here. So even in this loss, again, no moral victory, but it does feel like guys are continuing to refine what their roles are going to be, big picture for the Nets. And it's important. You wish it didn't have to come after 11 straight losses that you start to figure this stuff out, but it all still does matter, I think. And I'm trying to stay on that thread, as opposed to, you lost to the Wizards before the break. You really needed this one, especially depending on what the results are ahead of you in the standings.
Well, look, we could be having a very different conversation going into this All-Star break. Like, there's a lot of ways where this conversation is way worse than what we're talking about now. They had lost 11 straight. I'm being serious. Yeah, you're right. Like, this could be 14 losses. Like, it wasn't like they got healthy right before the break here and like threw out this total A+ of a team. Like, they willed themselves to 2 victories out of the last 3 games. And so there's definitely a world where we could be having a very, very different conversation around this team. The fact that it's so positive on the back end of a loss really speaks to, one, the two prior games, and still riding high off the Knicks game, which was, again, like going to be a game. I mean, Stephen A. Smith almost died. Like, he did.
Oh, by the way,
he did a rant
that quote that he used where it was like, Cam Thomas, pretty good. He'll probably be all right. I'll get the exact words. It was like,
no, believe me. I'll tell you right now, I've watched this thing 10 times because it had me crying. Like, it was so funny. It was part of a 3-minute long rant. And the cutaway is that Cam Thomas is like, he's good. He'll probably be all right. But he was actually mostly quoting Cam Thomas in this like heart attack moment around the Knicks. I'll put the link in the show notes. it's one of the I hate Stephen A. Smith. Like, just listen to him is like it's total nails on a chalkboard. This was such a visceral reaction to the Knicks. What the Nets did to him. I even showed it to my wife who doesn't know. By the way, my wife said, "Who are the Nets playing tonight? Is it the Washington bonus?" Because Washington was in the bonus and it said bonus next to their name. So she thought so she knows 0.0 about basketball. She thought their name was the Washington bonus. I'm using that as an example. I showed her the Stephen A. Smith clip and she was dying laughing because it was such a visceral sports reaction. Anyway, what he said about Cam Thomas was like he was decent, but it was mostly about trash of the Knicks. Okay, we're off the rails. We're going to talk a little bit about the big situation here for the Nets, because there are some kind of curious things going on here in the front court for Brooklyn. First, got to talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar. We've been talking about Built Bar forever. That's because it's easy, because Built Bar has all the flavors that you need to stay healthy. Ditch the candy bars in this new year. Go over to Built Bar. They have the stats to back it up. Very best protein bar on the market. If you're still working through those New Year's resolutions like I am, you know that can be tough to stay healthy. Sometimes it can be really easy to kind of fall off the old health wagon. You don't need to worry about it if you have Built Bar. All Built Bars are covered 100% in real chocolate. Real chocolate, you're thinking to yourself, how could that even be possible and still be healthy? Well, that's because they're low calorie, high protein. You can replace your candy bars with them. Let me give you some of the stats. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, just 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. Compare that to the candy bar. They just absolutely dust it. Then you get to the flavors: mint brownie, coconut almond, white chocolate, cookies and cream. Come on now. Those are just some of the new ones. They have all the old flavors as well. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
So that's some of the positive stuff that we want to talk about around this game and around the All-Star break looming and where we think this team can go. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is I think the exact even sample size that you wanted around Andre Drummond from 2 games to tell you, hey, this is why you can pump the brakes around thinking just automatically insert him into the starting lineup. He's your big at the 5, go forward, and we will prosper. And then you mentioned it coming out of the last game too, some of the lineup rotation stuff with James Johnson, etc. We're in this murky water, I think, with the Nets when it comes to their bigs, because we said this after the trade. It's nice to have Drummond in. He brings in another different skill set from what you currently have. And also, nobody on this roster has enough of everything you need to be able to say, this is not matchup dependent. This is a game-to-game decision that Steve Nash has to make about who goes out there. And I wonder what kind of refinement we're going to see around this as they go forward. I didn't even mention Nick Claxton yet, but it's just that still remains the big question mark. And obviously things will look different when you get Kevin Durant and you get Ben Simmons out there with them. But this is still a bit of a crapshoot to me when you think about having consistency.
Yeah, we got the full Andre Drummond experience here. This is why he wanted to be a max player, and he's just not. Like, this is, you're seeing why sometimes he did, and it didn't happen. But when it's not going well, and when you play a team that's like a little more athletic and a little quicker, and I think there's definite fatigue on his part. He's clearly not in tip-top shape. They are in the back-to-back. It's not like he's played crazy max minutes, but he wasn't playing tons of minutes in Philly either. Like, he was backing Embiid up, and Embiid had played almost the entire season. I think Drummond had like 2 or 3 starts up until this point. And so we saw sort of what happens when this guy doesn't have full level burst. Like, he got blocked a ton. He got back cut a ton. Like, the switching was terrible. Like, he was not able to rebound the lane. He had no burst going up under the basket to like finish off what would have been like very easy offensive rebounds into, at one point he was under the basket. He grabbed the rebound and he just frankly turned around and like found and like looked for Patty Mills around. And that's a sign too. It's like, he just doesn't have it. Right. Like, because otherwise the 7'1", what looks to be like 300 pounds. I know he's not that heavy, but like just massive guy should be just exploding back up to the rim on offensive rebounds, and he just doesn't have it. And the defensive end was a complete and utter mess. And so, like, was absolutely blown by in switches, the drop coverage. He was way slow into getting into those pieces and was just blown by at the rim multiple times. This is all to say, I'm very glad they have Andre Drummond. They got Andre Drummond in the trade. He fills a clear need for them. But this example tonight is exactly why you would worry around this iteration of him playing like a lot of playoff minutes, because good teams will completely destroy this kind of thing. So this is why we call him the other day like an innings eater. Like he's good to have around for 24 minutes a game to do a lot of like nitty gritty stuff that you need to happen. But the games where it's not happening, this was a good example of why you can't play him crazy minutes. It just wasn't happening for him on multiple levels.
And then when we talk about what is it going to look like with Aldridge, what is it going to look like when Simmons gets out there and Kevin Durant, right? The combinations that you can and cannot play together. We said you'd be hard pressed to be playing Claxton with Drummond, right? Like there's combinations that aren't going to work. I'd had the thought coming into it. I mean, it's two part. Initially, I thought, oh, interesting. There's this world where the Nets go, quote, small ball lineup, and you could put Simmons and Claxton and Kevin Durant out there together and have this very lengthy, very switchable defensive unit that's stymieing, and then just throw any of your two, Kyrie and Seth Curry or Patty Mills, or, all these guys that you have there to shoot from the perimeter. And it could be this very dangerous opportunity for this team. And yet Nick Claxton, who was speculated to be involved in the trades that didn't go through at the deadline, is now collecting DNPs. And it's been such an up and down year for him as it was. Do you think that the Nets are getting away from him and away from Day'Ron Sharpe, and it's going to be veterans or bust here? Or is this another one of those instances where, again, new players acclimating, Steve Nash very, very willing to throw out 33, 34, 68 different lineups over the season? Do you think they're going to get back to a point where Nicolas Claxton has value to this team? Or is it, we always saw ourselves as needing veteran bigs and big banging bodies, etc. It's hard for me to fully digest what direction they want to go at that position.
Well, it's hard to make the case that they want to go in the Claxton position with
No,
the
I know.
direction because they don't play him. So
Yeah,
I
no.
like any case or any case around that would be pure speculation. He's completely buried. It's a little weird. If there was going to be a game where he was going to play, this actually felt like it might be the one. Like where it's not like, they have Gafford, they have Thomas Bryant. He's definitely undersized compared to those guys. But like athletic, and maybe you don't want to switch a ton because you're not too worried about their perimeter play, even though they should have been because they got, killed on the perimeter. But in general, it's not like their guard play is so robust that you need like this big switchable five to be able to play. That being said, athleticism wise, or just like, hey, we're down guys, let's see what works. Like this still feels like the position where you would have seen him. It's hard to imagine a scenario where he comes back as they get healthier if he's just not playing now. So I'm a little confused by it. It was clear that if they try to trade him for a pick, that they probably saw the writing on the wall about where they want to go with him going forward. But the reason you can't make definitive statements around this stuff when it comes to the Nets is we've seen this just change on a dime where like a guy's just buried and they play. So like this has been the theme all season. Some of it's been circumstance, some of it's been injury, some of it's been just, what seems to be the whims of the coaching staff. It's sometimes hard to figure out what exactly is going on. So right now it seems like it's buried. Would I be floored if, 2 weeks from now he was playing 16 minutes a game and they found something? No, but that's just been the nature of this team for the run. But it does seem like right now he is not in the plans, and it doesn't. And when I will say it makes a little more. Let me dial this back. When I said I thought he could have played tonight, it was mostly because like, hey, we're throwing everything at the wall. David Duke Jr. is getting a chance, so like, let's just see what happens.
Yeah,
Claxton. The reason it's a little more difficult to play with him here without, like, he does fit a little better with guys like Durant and Kyrie because they're such creators that if he can just like roll to the rim and not have to do anything on offense, you're probably in a better spot. That's not this team they have now. And so they need like a little bit of creation from a Drummond who can run DHO stuff, who's a good passer and, like is good at crashing the offensive boards. None of that stuff Claxton is good at. Or Aldridge, who can kind of create a shot in the mid-range, right? Like Claxton can't do any of that stuff offensively. And so he is at a disadvantage playing with this particular group. Mm-hmm. So that's my kind of case for like, maybe we see more of him when they have more dynamic offensive personnel. But in general, it just kind of looks like his season kind of looks kind of over at this point.
Yeah, and I optimistically, if I'm a fan of the young man, as I happen to be, I'd like to see instances where once this team fully gets healthy and you have Kevin Durant and Simmons and Kyrie out there and everyone's together and everyone gets into their roles, I'd like to see over the back end of this season instances where you can bring him in to be the switching defensive specialist and show me that he has a role that you can utilize him in, not because you need it. You get down to your 8-man rotation or 9-man rotation when you come to the playoffs. He may be so far down the list it doesn't even matter. A lot of these guys are going to be that we've been talking about, but I think that's where he still has value. When it comes to a key game, when it comes to some key sequences, when you want to have every ability to get a defensive stop, get an important rebound, this is where you want to be able to flood the court with guys like Claxton alongside of a Ben Simmons and then Drummond for situational. Maybe LaMarcus Aldridge can survive it, but it feels like there's enough talent there to have value on this roster. It's just at this moment hard to see how it goes forward. And the last thing I'll say is it looks like LaMarcus Aldridge is about as crucial as a component to this team as anybody, because he's the only offensive big they have capable of creating shots, right? Being a shot
Well,
maker. And I know it doesn't matter as much once you're healthy and you have Durant and everyone else
that's all I
out
was
there.
going to say.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Yeah.
know that it's not nearly as important, but there have been stretches when the Nets were healthy in the front half of this season, and you could tell how stagnated things get or how clunky they got when Claxton couldn't finish, right? How disjointed things got when Blake Griffin wasn't capable of knocking down any of his perimeter looks from the outside. So it's just going to be interesting to see. That's probably the biggest thing, obviously. Biggest storyline after the break is going to be, how does this role develop? Where does some of these other guys like Blake Griffin get in there? Does James Johnson carve out a role for himself? Or is it, like we started with here, about surrounding the key pieces, Simmons, Durant, and Irving, with a lot of perimeter weapons and just saying, hey, come chase us? Because that was the premise coming into this year. It looks different now. They're more balanced now, but I still think that that's probably going to be their best offensive path forward.
Yeah, for sure. And just remember that Kevin Durant's a cheat code, and when we get the cheat code back, like everyone else looks good in their new
Punch in
in
the
their new roles.
code.
Yeah, there you go. Up, down, down, left, right, whatever. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. Head over to YouTube again. Just crazy numbers over on YouTube. We're so appreciative. Today was the best download day in Lockdown Nets history, and we said that 3 days ago and topped it again today. So we're just so appreciative of
Still
everyone
being
that's
honest.
jumped in to the podcast. Nothing but nothing if not honest. Just so appreciative that everyone that's jumped into the podcast, new listeners, people that have been around since we took over or even before we were in here. So we just love it all. It's just such a wind in the sails to look at these numbers every day, see them continue to climb. Hope to do even more of that out of the All-Star break. We have a full All-Star break schedule too. We'll still be coming at you every single day, even if the Nets aren't. So no worries there. In the meantime, subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, and go like and subscribe over on YouTube.
Let's get Patty Mills into that 3-point competition over the weekend, see if he can take home that trophy like Joe Harris did just a couple of years ago. And thankfully, this is not a truth when it comes to the NBA season. I thought I was so tranquil. I need to give up that illusion. There is decidedly no rest to be had in this world. Jules Verne.
Oh, a lot of leagues under the sea, I think. Journey to the Center of the Earth. One of the all-time great poets. Oh, man. We'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.